your level of knowledge and the world in which you experience life. But I think God reveals God's truth, but not in propositional form.
And you are the decider of what that truth is because it's a personal revelation?
No, one of the things that I think is terribly important is that there be a community of believers that walks together, and that you're always challenging one another so that no individual can be just sort of a law unto himself or herself.
Well, then what was going on when the community of believers was unanimous for over a millennium that your position you're holding tonight was wrong? Were they right then?
Well, but see, that community was also holding that slavery was legitimate, the second-class status of women was legitimate, and that epilepsy was caused by demon possession. I think that we've grown in a lot of understandings. And I think to limit God to the mentality of the biblical period of history is to limit God to the place where God becomes increasingly unbelievable to a great number of people that live in the 21st century.
But Bishop Spong, you just said that it's not an individual thing, that the community, and yet what that would mean is that truth has never been known until the 21st century.
No, I don't mean that at all. I mean truth is always unfolding. I think we know truth, but we don't know ultimate truth. Truth is something into which we journey. It's not something we ever possess. And my experience, particularly with religious people, is that when they think they possess the truth, that's when they begin to persecute anybody that disagrees with them. And I think that's where we get in trouble.
Bishop Spong, can you name any biblical author who held your view of God?
Oh, many.
You believe the biblical authors held a non-person?
I'd start with Paul Tillich.
No, I said biblical author, sir.
Oh, biblical author. Oh, no, I don't think they probably did. But that's because they were creatures of their time and space. They believed that God literally lived above the sky. So that God could hang out a star in the sky when Jesus was born, and God could put a star on a roller that could go through the sky, the heavens, so slowly that the wise men could keep up with it. I don't know any star like that lives in my world. You see, we don't even recognize that the light we see from a star was emitted millions of years ago. You know, the idea that you can hang a star up there to announce the birth of Jesus, if you know anything about the Hebrew tradition, you'll know that in the folklore of the Jewish people, a star was hung in the sky to announce the birth of Abraham, and a star was hung in the sky to announce the birth of Isaac, and a star was hung in the sky to announce the birth of Moses. And that was one of the ways the Jews talked about welcoming into the life of the world a figure that changes the way they understand God.
Bishop Spong, can you name anyone who identified themselves as a Christian the first 1,800 years of Christian history who held to a view of a non-theistic God?
I would say that the way most people have thought of God has been after the analogy of themselves. And that's what I mean by theistic. That is, you see of God, you think of God, we think of God. Most of us throughout history have thought of God as someone who is very much like us, except not bounded. Every word that we human beings use for God is a human word magnified. I am finite, God is infinite. I am mortal, God is immortal. I am limited in knowledge, God is omniscient. They're all analogies after human life. That's the only language we've got to speak. That's not what concerns me. What concerns me is when we take our human expanded knowledge and act as if we have captured the truth of God. All we have done is try to make sense out of our transcendent God experience. I believe God is very real, and I believe I confront God in the depth of my personhood. And so, I don't have any trouble saying God manifests God's self to me personally, but I don't take the next step and say, therefore God is what I have created God to be, because I think God is infinitely more than I can ever imagine God to be.
Bishop Spong, if one believed in propositional divine revelation, theoretically, would it be possible for a personal God who created all things to reveal his will as to man's proper behavior in human language? Would such be theoretically beyond the capacity of a creator God? Are you saying in essence with what you've been saying so far, that's beyond God's capacity to give us kind of divine revelation?
I don't ever say what's beyond God's capacity, nor do I tell God what is in God's capacity. I think that's the distinction. I think God is infinitely more than you and I will ever know. The fact that the Christian church is not a very unified institution indicates that human beings have been debating these realities for a long, long time. I think it's time we stopped excommunicating one another because we don't agree, and say the perceptions of God among human beings vary widely. And we're all faithful in our journey. Deep down, I would actually define myself more as a mystic today than anything else.
Bishop Spong, would you agree that if someone uses your writings to express hatred toward Christians, that you are not responsible for the misuse of your own published statements?
That's an interesting way to phrase it. I'm not aware that people do that, but if you are aware of that, I would be very sorry that my writings are used. I have a very deep appreciation for what it means to be human. I have a very deep sense that most of our humanity is twisted and warped. And I don't think it's twisted and warped because we have fallen into something called original sin. I think it's twisted and warped because we have emerged out of an evolutionary soup and we have made our own survival our highest value. And I think that's where the problems of this world come from. So we surround ourselves with tribal identity, which justifies the fact that we can hate other people's tribes. We're all in America today aware of how many American soldiers have given their lives in the Iraqi war. But because we keep account of that, we're not aware of how many Iraqis have died. That's a vague, the president suggests it might be 40,000 on one occasion. It's a vague concept because basically we don't value Iraqis. But I think they too are created in God's image, redeemed by God in Jesus Christ, and called to be all that they can be. So I would regard the death of Iraqi as equally as disastrous as the death of any other citizen.
Sir, could we get back to my question here?
Your question is asked in such a way that it can't be answered without perjuring yourself.
All right. Well, would it not likewise follow, sir, that your repeated references in your books to what I would call wide-eyed cultists like Fred Phelps and his tiny little cultic band of followers from Kansas really has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the sober yet believing exegesis of the text of Scripture? I mean, aren't they an extreme example that by utilizing them and not responding to sober exegesis of the text that there's a prejudice involved there? I
haven't had sober exegetes hanging placards out and demanding my execution like I have had Fred Phelps, and that's an enormous difference. Now, I would not be here today to have this discussion with you and with this audience if I didn't want to respect your opinion and the opinions of this audience. I'm bearing witness to the fact that I have a different perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm claiming that perspective is within the bounds of the Christian faith, and I'm urging a wider tolerance and a deeper knowledge of what it means to be male, female, black, white, left-handed, right-handed, gay, straight, transgender, and bisexual. And when we begin to understand those differences, I think we can respond with more compassion and more love and, frankly, be more Christ-like.
Sir?
Yes?
You wrote, quote, "Their special hatred is reserved for those who claim to be themselves believers and yet who reject what they are sure is the, quote, clear teaching of Scripture, end quote, in regard to the evil of homosexuality." That's what you wrote, end quote.
Yes, I think that's an accurate description of my feelings.
Is it your position